Hi everybody. With my recent obsession with historical tarot, I've become rather intrigued and focused on the Rider Waite Smith, not from an esoteric approach, but from an exoteric angle for myself, because that's my current leaning anyway. And so I would like to read out to you a section of chapter 4 from a book that I've been reading on and off called A Cultural History of Tarot by Helen Farley. This chapter 5 is called Across the Channel to England because the previous chapter, chapter 4, she had been talking about how the history of tarot and its transformation to an esoteric device unfolded in France. So here we go. Arthur Edward Waite. Arthur Edward Waite was born in Brooklyn in 1857, the illegitimate son of an English mother and an American father who had been a sea captain. After the death of Captain Waite at sea in 1858, Emma Lovell returned to England with her 2 children. Waite was raised a Catholic and made a living from translating, writing, and reviewing books on occult topics. Early in 1891, at the age of 34 years, Arthur Edward Waite entered the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn as Frater Sacramentum Regis or Regis abscondere bonum est. It is good to keep the sacrament of king, quote unquote. He was the order's 19th initiate, but soon left only to rejoin in 1896. So innocuous did the order seem that Waite encouraged his wife, Ada Lakeman, to join, though Soror Lumen Christi, the Light of Christ, which I'm assuming is her name into the order, attended no meetings after her initiation in 1891. Waite was never on very good terms with either Westcott or Mathers. Together with fellow Golden Dawn members Palmer Thomas and Marcus Worsley Blackden, Waite hatched a conspiracy that would irreconcilably fracture the Golden Dawn. The trio formed the Secret Council of Rites, with the expressed aim to obtain and exercise jurisdiction over a number of occult orders and fringe Masonic rites. The 1903 annual general meeting of the Inner Order of the Golden Dawn dissolved in chaos, and A.E. Waite proposed that those who regarded the Golden Dawn as capable of a mystical instead of an occult construction should and had indeed resolved to work independently, going their own way. A substantial proportion of the Second Order adepti followed him, and the Outer Order of the Independent and Rectified Rite was born, with its inner fellowship of the Rosy Cross. It began its meetings at Mark Mason's Hall in November 1903. With little justification, they retained the name of Isis Urania. They appointed the Reverend William Alexander Ayton as their 3rd chief, joining Waite and Blackden. New Temple abandoned all magical work, abolished examinations within the Second Order, and used heavily revised rituals designed to express a torturous Christian mysticism. Waite taught the members to pursue their spiritual quest not by rejecting reason, but by retaining it. These were adepts for whom magic had no appeal and who sought instead that mystical union with God that was the final goal of men. Waite concluded that the symbolism in each of the traditions of alchemy, Kabbalah, Freemasonry, and Rosicrucianism demonstrated a common route to a common end, and a correct interpretation would lead to a revelation of concealed ways to spiritual illumination. Later known as the Holy Order of the Golden Dawn, the Outer Order of the Independent and Rectified Rite survived a decade of intense rivalries, and defections to groups such as Rudolf Steiner's Anthroposophical Society before Waite closed it down in 1914. In 1909, with Crowley's publication of The Secret Attributions of the Golden Dawn, Waite felt able to publish his own tarot deck without violating the secrecy of the order. Waite chose Pamela Colman Smith to bring his designs to fruition. Though London-born, Colman Smith had American parents and studied art at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. She received a flat sum for executing the tarot deck, which was released at the end of 1909. The pack was to become the first commercially available tarot deck in England and has remained the most popular. With the exception of the court cards and aces, all of the cards bore Roman numerals at the top. The trump cards were numbered 1 to 21, with the fool designated as 0. The aces, court cards, and trump cards also bore their names at the bottom of the card. As with the Golden Dawn decks, the suits signs of sword, wands, cups, and pentacles were retained. However, the court was more traditional, with the king and queen enthroned, the knight mounted on a horse, and the page standing. The aces featured a large hand appearing from a cloud and holding one of the suit signs. The pip cards 2 through to 10 were the most unusual feature of Waite's deck. As mentioned already, they bore their corresponding Roman numeral at the top of the card and featured the requisite number of suit emblems, but these were incorporated into a scene in which people, buildings, and landscapes were also accommodated. These scenes were designed to correspond to their divinatory meanings as ascribed by Waite. These minor arcana cards, which originally corresponded to those of the ordinary playing card deck, were totally transformed to facilitate tarot's role in divination, a powerful illustration of tarot's revolution from a game to an esoteric device. A 15th century Ferrari's pack known as the Sola Busca deck also followed this scheme, and it seems likely that Coleman Smith and Waite drew their inspiration from this pack, photos of which were housed in the British Museum. To publicize the deck, Waite wrote a short article for the Occult Review announcing that he had secured the services of a very skillful and original artist, Miss Pamela Coleman Smith, though he misspelled her name. He also hinted at the involvement of another person. This unnamed collaborator was thought to be William Butler Yeats. The name of the trumps basically followed those ascribed by Mathers, the exception being Trump 21, which became the world rather than the universe. Waite maintained the positions of strength as trumped 8 and justice as trumped 11. Mostly the designs of the trump corresponded to those of the Tarot de Marseille, one exception being the Fool, who in Waite's deck was resplendent in gorgeous clothes and held a wand in one hand and a rose in the other as he paused at the brink of a precipice. The magician also differed markedly. Above his head was the sign of infinity, and on the table before him were spread the signs of the 4 suits. The priestess, trump 2, had a lunar crescent at her feet and a solar cross on her breast. She held a scroll in her hands, which was marked Torah, and she was seated between white and black pillars inscribed J and B. For Jachin and Boaz, the pillars of the mystic temple. This symbolism was overtly Freemasonic and bellied Waite's interest in this institution. Naked lovers each stood in front of a tree on trump 6. The woman stood in front of a fruit tree in which a snake curled around the trunk in an allusion to the biblical Eve. A great winged figure was in the sky above them. The chariot, trump 7, was drawn by 2 sphinxes, one black and one white. The tunic of the warrior who rode it was covered in hieroglyphics. Waite's Wheel of Fortune was a disc inscribed with Hebrew letters denoting the transliteration of tarot as rota, interspersed with the letters of the tetragrammaton. The corners of the card were occupied by the living creatures of Ezekiel. A strange figure in the middle of the wheel was said to represent the perpetual motion of a fluidic universe and for the flux of human life. A sphinx with a sword sat atop the wheel, a serpent slithered downwards to the left of it, and a dog-headed god Anubis was on the bottom right of the wheel. The hanged man was suspended by his right ankle from a living gallows in the shape of a letter T. His arms were crossed behind his back, and he had a halo around his head. Death, as a skeleton in armor on a horse, carried a black flag instead of a scythe. Around the feet of the horse were children and a bishop. Many of the ideas of his symbolism were from Waite himself. The remainder derived from the works of Eliphas Levi, Paul Christian, and Pappus. Waite spoke of the tarot symbolism as reflecting the mystic initiation, itself a metaphor for spiritual rebirth. Acknowledging the work of Mathers and Pappus, he wrote, "We get, as it were, a spiritual history of man, or of the soul coming out from the eternal, passing into the darkness of the material body and returning to the height." The astrological and Kabbalistic significance of the tarot trumps was made overt by Waite. The high priestess rested her foot on a crescent moon. The association of Venus with the Empress was made obvious by the heart-shaped shield bearing the sigil of Venus, which leant against her throne. The arms of the throne of the emperor were capped with ram's heads, signifying the astrological sign of Aries. These correspondences were identical to those set out in the teachings of the Golden Dawn. The trumps also bore the symbolism associated with Rosicrucianism. Roses and crosses were found throughout the trump cards. Prominently, the figure of Death carried a standard which displayed the mystic rose, which signified life. Likewise, the Fool held a white rose in his left hand. Waite's homage to Freemasonry was seen in the black and white pillars of Yakin and Boaz on the priestess card, and in the presence of the sphinxes on the chariot trump. On the later card, Waite also maintained Levi's Hindu lingam, a modification of the corresponding Tarot de Marseille trump. Representations of light played a significant part in the symbolism as solar discs, wheels, and arcs. These depictions of the sun's path represented the journey of the soul. Gold also had a prominent place in the symbolism of this deck. Again, this was another metaphor for the ascent of spirit. Above all, Waite was deeply immersed in Christian mysticism, and so its symbolism was everywhere evident in the pack. The figure of Eve was seen on the lovers. The world card boasted the 4 living creatures of Ezekiel. On the Ace of Cups, a dove bore a cross-marked host and descends to place the wafer in the cup. According to medieval legend, on Good Friday, the Holy Spirit took the form of a dove and placed a host in the Holy Grail. In later years, Waite became disillusioned with the Golden Dawn and its adherents. In 1926, he wrote an article for the Occult Review entitled "The Great Symbols of the Tarot." In this, he proclaimed that the tarot did not contain occult truths, rather mystical ones. In addition, he stated elsewhere that he did not believe that there was a valid correspondence between the trump symbols and the Hebrew alphabet. Instead, Waite came to see a different significance for the tarot suits. As with W.B. Yeats, he came to see the correspondences between the tarot suits and the Grail hollows or talismans of Celtic myths, which he named as the lance, the dish, the grail, and the sword. He found an association between the suit of wands and the spear or lance. He further associated the suit of wands with the ordinary playing card suit of diamonds, arguing that the tip of the spear was diamond-shaped. He drew a connection between the tarot suit of pentacles and the playing card suit of clubs. The club, he stated, resembled a shamrock, which frequently was a decorative motif in the dish. Waite named the dish as one of the Grail Hallows, rather than the stone of Farley which Yeats had named. As with Alfred Nutt and Jessie Weston, he erroneously traced the legend of King Arthur and the Holy Grail back to earlier Celtic mythology. He linked tarot with the Celtic mysteries by formulating a spread or method of laying the cards out, which he called an ancient Celtic method of divination, though he did not specify what was specifically Celtic about the process. The spread became known as the Celtic Cross, and it remains one of the most popular used for tarot divination. Though I have concentrated on the development of tarot in England, there was also considerable interest in the deck as an esoteric device elsewhere in Europe. In Germany, Ernst Tristan Kurzan wrote on tarot in 1920 as well as about runes in the increasingly nationalistic interwar milieu. Waldemar von Uexküll's book on the subject was published in Munich 2 years later, entitled such and such in German, which I can't read, translated to Initiation in Ancient Egypt in accordance with the Book of Thoth. Perhaps the most renowned author on the deck at this time was August Frank Glan. His book, the German tarot book Prediction, Astrology, Wisdom, 3 Levels of Initiation, published in 1924, became very popular, being reissued in 1930 and sold with a pack of tarot cards designed by Hans Schubert of Rheinfeld. All 3 authors depended largely on information derived from the French tradition of esoteric tarot, in which legends of Egypt loom large. And then it goes on into other parts of the world, but this significant talk about Waite ended there, I think. And so I will probably reread that section as I reread the whole chapter, if I ever get to that at some point, just to put him in a larger historical context, which I always find quite interesting. So until then, I talk to you guys later.